I never thought I'd be standing in the middle of my son's workplace, staring into the kind of truth that could tear a family apart. But that's where life led me. And the way it all started was so small, so ordinary, that if I hadn't paid attention, I might have missed the whole thing. My son looked me in the eye one morning and said, "Dad, don't talk to my boss." Just like that. His voice tight, his eyes darting like he was hiding something behind those words. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. What could he possibly be hiding from me? Stay with me, because what I uncovered not only changed how I saw my son forever, but also how I understood myself as a father. And before I get too deep into this, let me say, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to Final Twist. These are the stories that keep you holding your breath until the very last word. And this one will leave you questioning just how well you really know the people you love. My name is Edward, though most people just call me Ed. I'm 57 years old, a quiet kind of man, the type who listens more than he talks. I've always thought of myself as patient, dependable, the kind of person you could lean on when life got hard. I grew up in a small town, worked my way up in the corporate world until I retired early, and then settled into a life that was supposed to be peaceful. I'm not flashy, not dramatic. I never needed to be the loudest man in the room. My strength, I thought, was in being steady, reliable, and fair. People respected me for that. My family relied on me for that. I've been married to my wife, Claire, for 32 years. She's warm, social, the life of every gathering, the complete opposite of me in so many ways. But together, we worked. We had 2 kids, and if I'm being honest, our lives revolved around them. My daughter Julia is 29 now, married with a little one on the way. She was always the studious one, careful, thoughtful, the kind of child who made parenting look easy. My son, Daniel. Well, Daniel was different. He was my firstborn, and I had all the hopes in the world for him. He was smart, no doubt about it, sharp with numbers, quick with words, charming when he wanted to be. But he also had a streak in him, a restlessness, a hunger for shortcuts. Where Julia would study until her eyes hurt, Daniel would find ways to game the system. Don't get me wrong, I loved him just the same, maybe more than I should have. I always had this soft spot for him, maybe because I saw parts of myself in him, the ambition, the desire to prove something to the world. But while my path was slow and steady, his was reckless. He was always reaching for something bigger, something faster, and I told myself that was just his way, that he'd grow out of it, that one day he'd settle, just like I did, by the time he turned 30. Daniel had a good job, or at least it looked that way on the surface. He worked at a mid-sized financial firm, climbing his way up in management. He dressed well, spoke well, carried himself like he had it all figured out. I was proud, I'll admit it. I told people my son was doing well, that he was on his way to bigger things. And then one day, that sentence, "Dad, don't talk to my boss," cracked the image I had built of him like a hammer to glass. It happened one Saturday afternoon. I'd stopped by his house to drop off some tools he'd asked for. We sat in his kitchen drinking coffee, and I mentioned casually that I might reach out to his boss. I'd met the man once at a company event, and he struck me as someone worth knowing, a sharp mind, polite, respectful. I thought maybe we could talk business, maybe even collaborate on some local charity projects I'd been supporting since retirement. Before I could even finish the sentence, Daniel's whole demeanor changed. His hand froze mid-air, his coffee cup trembling slightly. His voice, usually smooth, came out rushed and nervous. "Dad, don't talk to my boss. Seriously, don't. Just don't." At first, I laughed it off. I thought maybe he was just embarrassed, like he didn't want his dad snooping around in his professional life. But the look in his eyes, it wasn't embarrassment. It was fear. The kind of fear that makes your stomach knot because you realize there's something deeper there, something he doesn't want you to know. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, turning those words. over in my mind. Why not? What was he hiding from me? Daniel and I had our differences, but we'd always been close. At least I thought we had. I thought he trusted me, and suddenly the thought that he might be living some kind of double life gnawed at me. I tried to shake it off, but the more I tried, the more it consumed me. The following week, the opportunity presented itself. His company was hosting another event, a networking mixer for clients and families. Claire wanted to go. She loved those kinds of things. So we dressed up and attended. I remember walking into that polished hall, the chandeliers gleaming overhead, the air thick with polite laughter and clinking glasses. And there he was, Daniel's boss, Martin Hughes. A man in his late 40s, confident, approachable, with the kind of presence that made people gather around him. I introduced myself, and for a moment it felt harmless. We shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, but as we talked, I noticed something. His eyes, when I mentioned Daniel, flickered just slightly, but enough for me to catch it. A shadow of doubt, of hesitation. He smiled politely, but the warmth in his voice dimmed. And then, when he excused himself a little too quickly, I knew my son had given him a reason to be wary. That was the beginning. That was the moment I realized my son wasn't just protecting his privacy, he was protecting a secret. And if I was going to find out what it was, I'd have to go digging into places I never imagined I'd go as a father. I didn't want to believe it. For days after that mixer, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, that Martin's hesitation was nothing more than a busy man trying to move on to the next handshake. But when you know someone long enough, your own flesh and blood, you can feel when something isn't right. And with Daniel, that feeling only grew stronger. I started noticing little things. His phone always face down on the table, silenced. Calls he'd ignore when I was around. The way he'd brush off any conversation about work, where before he used to boast about his successes, he was pulling away. And the more I saw it, the more I wondered if I'd been blind all along. One night, Claire caught me sitting in the living room long after she'd gone to bed, staring at nothing. "Ed," she whispered, her voice tired but concerned, "what's wrong with you lately? You've been distracted." I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to drag her into it, but another part, the heavier, darker part, felt like if I didn't speak, I'd suffocate. So I told her. I told her about the look on Daniel's face when I mentioned his boss, about the strange way Martin had reacted at the mixer. Claire listened, her hand resting on my arm, her eyes soft with worry. When I finished, she shook her head. "You're reading too much into this," she said. "Daniel's always been sensitive about people meddling in his life. You know that. Maybe he just wants to keep his work separate." Her words were kind, but I could hear the doubt in them too. She didn't believe me, not fully. And that only made me more determined, because if I was wrong, I'd make peace with it. But if I was right, the chance to find out came sooner than I expected. A week later, I was in town running errands when I passed by Daniel's office building. It wasn't unusual. I'd been there before for holiday parties, to drop off lunch when he was too busy to leave. But that day, something caught my eye. Through the glass doors, I saw Daniel walking with a man who was not Martin, but someone who looked like he carried weight in that office. They were speaking in hushed tones, Daniel's face pale, his shoulders stiff. And then, this man handed Daniel an envelope, thick, heavy, the kind that didn't carry birthday cards. I froze. Daniel slipped the envelope into his briefcase, glanced around nervously, and then walked away. That image burned into my mind. I told myself it could be anything, company, paperwork, a client agreement, but deep down I knew it was something more. That night I couldn't resist. I asked him casually how work was going. His answers were vague, slippery, busy, stressful, nothing exciting. When I pressed about Martin, his boss, his face tightened. "Dad, drop it," he snapped. his voice sharper than I'd heard in years. Just drop it, okay? It was then I realized I wasn't just dealing with secrecy. I was dealing with fear. My son was afraid of being found out, and so I did what I never thought I'd do. I began to investigate my own child. I reached out to an old colleague of mine, a man named Walter, who still had connections in the corporate world. He owed me a favor from years ago, and when I explained that I was worried about Daniel, about him maybe being tangled in something illegal, Walter agreed to poke around. A week later, he called me. His voice was low, urgent. "Ed," he said, "I don't know how to tell you this, but your son's name has been popping up in some places it shouldn't." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "There are whispers," he continued. "Numbers not lining up, accounts being tampered with. It's not confirmed, but if it's true, Daniel could be involved in some serious financial misconduct, fraud level serious." I sat there in silence, my hand gripping the phone so tightly I thought it might crack. Fraud. My son, the boy I raised, the man I defended to everyone, could be a thief. When I hung up, I felt hollow. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. But the puzzle pieces were aligning in a way that terrified me. His nervousness, his secrecy, the envelope, it all fit too well. That night, Claire noticed my silence again. "What is it?" she asked. I looked at her, at the woman who had stood by me for 3 decades, and I felt shame rise in my chest. Shame because I didn't want to tell her. Shame because I knew if I did, the truth would no longer just be a suspicion. It would be real. So I lied. I told her I was just tired, that work around the house had worn me out. She didn't believe me, but she let it go. The next day, I made a decision. If I was going to confront Daniel, I needed to be sure. I needed proof, and that meant getting closer to Martin Hughes, his boss. I arranged a lunch meeting under the guise of discussing community investments. Martin was polite, gracious, even seemed pleased to talk. But the moment I brought up Daniel, I saw it again, that flicker, the hesitation. He cleared his throat, set down his glass, and leaned in. "Ed," he said, carefully choosing his words, "you seem like a good man, and I can see you care about your son, but you should know Daniel isn't who you think he is." My heart pounded in my chest. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "I can't get into details, not yet. But if you really want the truth, come by my office tomorrow morning, alone. I'll show you something." The next morning, I walked into Martin's office, every nerve in my body buzzing. He closed the door, locked it, and handed me a file. Thick, like the envelope I'd seen. I opened it, my hands trembling. Inside were reports, emails, transaction logs, and there it was, Daniel's name, over and over, tied to accounts that didn't belong to him. Money that had been moved, hidden, siphoned away, thousands of dollars, maybe more. I felt sick. My vision blurred as I stared at the evidence of my son's betrayal. Betrayal not just of his company, but of me, of everything I had taught him. Honesty, integrity, hard work. And here he was, building his life on lies. I closed the file, my hands shaking. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. Martin's eyes were steady, his voice calm but heavy. "Because he's going to drag your family down with him if you don't stop him. And because, Ed, you're the only one he might actually listen to." I walked out of that office feeling like the ground beneath me had crumbled. My son was a fraud, a liar. And now I had a choice to make. Protect him and become complicit in his crimes, or expose him, even if it destroyed him. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every shadow on the wall looking like it was mocking me. My mind kept replaying my son's words, his urgent plea, his nervous tone, the way he looked at me with fear in his eyes. "Don't talk to my boss." Why would he say that unless something serious was going on? My gut was screaming that this wasn't just about keeping work and home separate. This was about something darker, something he didn't want me to know. When morning, I felt sick, my stomach churned with dread, and my heart pounded like it wanted out of my chest. I had raised my boy with honesty and hard work, and the thought that he might be caught up in something bad terrified me. I'm not proud of it, but I decided I couldn't just sit back and trust everything was fine. I had to know the truth. And so, I made up my mind. I was going to his workplace. I dressed carefully, trying to look like I had business of my own. Jeans, a neat sweater, my hair tied back. I didn't want to draw too much attention, but I wanted to be taken seriously. If anyone questioned me, as I drove to the office where my son worked, I felt like a spy in one of those movies. My hands trembling on the wheel, my throat dry, every red light making me want to scream in frustration. The building was taller than I expected, a glass, front with polished metal doors. People in business attire walked in and out, most of them clutching coffee cups, their faces set with stress. I parked a block away and sat there for a few minutes, gathering my courage. My son had warned me not to come, and part of me felt like I was betraying him. But then, I thought about the haunted look in his eyes, the way his voice cracked when he begged me not to get involved. That wasn't just embarrassment, that was fear. And if he was too afraid to tell me, then it was my job as his mother to find out for him. I walked in like I belonged there. The receptionist glanced at me, asked if I had an appointment. I lied and said I was meeting someone from HR about potential openings. She gave me a polite smile and handed me a visitor badge. My pulse raced just like that I was in. The air smelled of coffee and printer ink, the hum of conversations and ringing phones buzzing around me. I moved slowly, scanning faces, trying to see if I could spot my son. And then I saw him. He was across the open office space, sitting at his desk, hunched over like the weight of the world was pressing down on his shoulders. His tie was loose, his eyes tired, and every now and then he glanced nervously at a glass-walled office at the far end of the room. That must be the boss. I shifted closer, pretending to be lost, and peeked through the glass. The man inside was nothing like I expected. He wasn't old or intimidating. He looked young, maybe late 30s, with sharp features and slicked back hair. But there was something about his expression that made my skin crawl. He smiled at people when they entered, but the moment they turned their back, his face hardened into something cold and cruel. I stood there, heart thumping, watching. Then it happened. My son got up, clutching a folder, and walked into that office. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the way the man leaned forward, his smile sharp as a blade, his finger tapping the desk in a way that made my son flinch. My boy's hands shook as he passed over the folder. The boss flipped through. It said something and then suddenly slammed the file shut so hard, my son actually jumped. Rage burned in my chest. How dare this man intimidate him like that? My son wasn't a child. He was 24, a grown man. But seeing him reduced to that nervous, shrinking figure broke something inside me. I had to know what was going on. I ducked into a nearby hallway, trying to get closer without being seen. My hands were sweaty, my heart in my throat. Then, by pure luck, I overheard two employees chatting by the vending machine. They didn't notice me, two caught up in their own gossip. "Did you hear about Daniel?" One said, her voice low but urgent. "Yeah," the other whispered. "Poor guy, that boss is ruthless. I don't know how much longer he can last." My ears perked up. Daniel, my son's name. "What's he got on him?" the first one asked. "I don't know exactly," the second replied. "But people say the boss has dirt on Daniel, something personal. That's why he keeps pushing him harder than the others. Daniel doesn't fight back, he just takes it." My blood ran cold. Dirt? What dirt could anyone possibly have on my son? He was kind, hard-working, honest to a fault. What secret could he be hiding that would give this man such power over him? I backed away before they noticed me and hurried outside, my head spinning. The truth was there, just out of reach, taunting me. Whatever this boss was holding over Daniel's head, it was enough to make my son live in fear, enough to keep him silent even with me, his own mother. That night when Daniel came home, I tried again. I wanted to be gentle, careful. I made his a favorite dinner, lasagna, the way he liked it with extra cheese. He smiled weakly, thanked me, but his eyes were distant. As we ate, I said softly, "Daniel, I went by your office today." The fork slipped from his hand and clattered onto the plate. His face went pale. You what?" he stammered. "I just wanted to see where you work," I lied quickly, though the guilt of it twisted in my chest. "It's a nice place, but I saw you with your boss. Daniel, he scares you, doesn't he?" His eyes filled with panic. "Mom, I told you not to get involved," he burst out, his voice shaking. "You don't understand. If you talk to him, if you do anything, it'll get worse, for me, for us." "Then help me understand," I pleaded, reaching across the table to grab his hand. "Please, son, tell me what he has on you. What are you so afraid of?" He yanked his hand back, his face twisted with shame and fear. "I can't," he whispered. "You just have to trust me. Please, Mom, stay out of this." And then he stood up, pushed his chair back and went to his room, leaving me sitting there with my untouched plate of food and 1,000 questions clawing at my chest. That night, I cried. I hadn't cried like that in years. My son was drowning, and he wouldn't let me save him. But one thing became clear, as the tears soaked my pillow: if he couldn't fight for himself, then I would fight for him. Whatever this boss was holding over Daniel, whatever secret he thought made my son weak, I was going to find it. And when I did, I would tear this man's power apart piece by piece. I was a mother, and nothing was going to stop me. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was something close to purpose. The kind of feeling you get when you finally decide that you're done being a victim. I knew what I had to do, even if part of me still trembled at the thought. I was going to confront the truth, and I was going to do it in a way that left no room for denial. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, my coffee going cold, staring at my son's work schedule he had left on the counter, his neat handwriting, circled shifts, notes about deadlines. It all made me ache. He was responsible, hard-working, and maybe a little too trusting. He didn't deserve to carry this burden alone. But more than that, he didn't deserve to be dragged down by a boss who preyed on people's weaknesses. I picked up my phone and drafted a message to my son. "Can we have lunch together today? Just the two of us. My treat." My finger hovered over the send button for a good minute before I hit it. He replied almost instantly, "Sure, Mom, noon." That quick, casual response tugged at my heart. He had no idea what I was planning, no clue about the storm brewing in me. At noon sharp, we sat in a small diner across from each other. He looked tired, like the weight of the world was pressing on his young shoulders. But when he smiled at me, it was that same sweet smile from when he was a boy, the one that always made me want to protect him. "How's work?" I asked gently, stirring my tea, though I wasn't really thirsty. He shrugged, looking down at his plate. "It's fine. Busy. You know how it is." I leaned forward. "Alex, I know you told me not to talk to your boss. I know you didn't want me to get involved. But honey, you don't have to carry whatever this is all by yourself. I'm your mom. You can tell me anything." For a second, I thought he'd finally break. His eyes glossed over with unshed tears, and his lips parted like he was about to spill everything. But then he forced a smile, shook his head and muttered, "It's nothing, Mom. Really. Don't worry about it." That hurt more than if he'd yelled at me. He was protecting me even while suffering himself, and that made me more determined. If he wouldn't let me in willingly, then I'd have to step into the shadows he was trying to keep me from. That night, I did something I never thought I would. I followed him. I parked a few blocks from his office, far enough not to be noticed, but close enough to watch. Through the glass windows, I could see him moving quickly, filing papers, carrying boxes, always busy, always obedient. And then I saw the man, his boss. The moment I laid eyes on him, everything clicked. The arrogance in his posture, the way he barked orders while leaning back lazily in his chair, the smug grin that spread across his face when my son jumped to do his bidding. It made my stomach churn. I knew men like that. I'd seen them before in my own working days, the kind who thrived on power, who sought out the meek to control, who fed off the silence of those too scared to fight back. But this wasn't just about workplace bullying. I could sense something darker. I watched as the boss pulled my son into his office, shut the door, and drew the blinds. My heart hammered against my ribs so loud I thought someone would hear it. What was he doing in there? What was he saying? "To my boy?" I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. They stayed in there for almost an hour. When Alex finally emerged, he looked pale, drained, like he'd just run a marathon he hadn't trained for. His steps dragged, and he didn't even notice me sitting in the shadows across the street. That was the night I decided enough was enough. I couldn't stand on the sidelines anymore. The truth was suffocating me, and the only way to breathe again was to drag it into the light. The very next day, I called in a favor from an old friend, someone who still worked in local government. I didn't explain everything, just that I suspected my son's boss was involved in something shady, and I needed information. She was hesitant at first, but promised to see what she could find. When she called me back, her voice was grave. "You were right to be worried. The man has a history, a sealed case from years ago involving workplace harassment and financial misconduct. But somehow he slipped through the cracks, no convictions, no record that sticks, but the whispers never stopped." My blood ran cold. Suddenly, Alex's secretiveness made perfect sense. He wasn't just trying to avoid embarrassing me. He was protecting me from a predator. I sat on that information for hours, debating my next move. Do I confront Alex? Do I confront the boss? Do I go straight to the authorities? Every option felt like it carried the risk of shattering my son's fragile world. But then I realized something. Silence was exactly what the boss was counting on. Silence was his shield, and if I stayed quiet, I'd be complicit in my son's suffering. So I made a plan. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a blazer that made me feel powerful, strong. Not just a mom, but a woman with a mission. I drove to the office, parked in plain sight this time, and walked through the front doors with my head held high. My heart was pounding, but my steps were steady. The receptionist looked up, startled. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm here to see Mr. Holloway." The boss. When I walked into his office, his eyes flicked up from his desk, and for a split second, I saw recognition. He knew who I was, and then he smirked, leaning back in his chair like he had all the power in the world. "Well, well," he drawled. "So you must be Alex's mother. I was wondering how long it would take you to show up." His arrogance fueled my anger, but I kept my voice calm. "You and I need to have a conversation about my son, about what you've been doing to him." He chuckled, a low, mocking sound. "Careful, that's a dangerous accusation." I met his gaze without flinching. Not as dangerous as what happens if I start talking to the right people. For the first time, his smile faltered, just for a second, but I caught it and it gave me strength. I leaned across his desk, lowered my voice and whispered, "You've taken advantage of him long enough. That ends today. I don't care what threats you've made or what secrets you're hiding. I know about your past, and if you so much as look at my son the wrong way again, I will make sure the whole world knows too." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. He stared at me, his jaw tight, his fists clenched on the desk, but he didn't speak. He couldn't. And in that moment I knew I had struck a nerve. I walked out of that office with my hands trembling, my heart racing but my head high. For the first time, I felt like I was reclaiming something, not just for myself, but for my son. But as I pulled out of the parking lot, one thought haunted me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Men like him didn't back down easily. And if he thought he could intimidate me into silence, he was dead wrong. I was ready for whatever came next. When the day of reckoning finally came, I felt this strange mixture of nerves and calm, like my whole body knew it was about to face something monumental. The meeting was scheduled for 9 in the morning, and I barely slept the night before. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, running through everything I had uncovered, everything I was about to expose, and every single way this might play out. My hands were sweaty, my chest tight, but beneath all of that was this burning resolve. I wasn't doing this just for me anymore. I was doing this for my son, for the younger version of me who had always felt too timid to stand up for himself, and for every other person who had been stepped on by someone like my boss. When I arrived at the office, the energy was already different. Word had spread that something big was about to happen, though no one knew exactly what. People hovered near their desks with restless curiosity, whispering in corners, shooting glances at the conference room like it was a stage waiting for the curtain to rise. I walked in, trying to steady my breathing, my folder of evidence clutched under my arm like it contained my entire soul. My boss, Robert, was already there, sitting at the head of the conference table with that same smug expression he always wore when he thought he was untouchable. His tie was perfectly straight, his hair slicked back, his posture screaming authority. But for the first time, I noticed something else in his eyes. Something tight, something defensive, like he already suspected that the ground beneath him wasn't as solid as it used to be. The HR director, a middle-aged woman named Karen, who was usually all business, sat across from him with a legal pad and pen. 2 senior managers were present as well, probably to witness whatever was about to go down. My son had insisted on being there too. He wanted to see it unfold with his own eyes, and after everything he'd been through, I couldn't deny him that. He sat quietly in the corner, his face calm, but his eyes blazing with quiet fury. The meeting began with the usual formality. Karen cleared her throat, straightened her papers, and said, "We've gathered here today to discuss some concerns that have been brought to our attention regarding workplace conduct." Her voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of tension that everyone could feel. Robert leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Concerns?" he repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. "I've run this place efficiently for years. If anyone has concerns, it's because they can't handle high standards." I felt a wave of heat rush through me, but I didn't take the bait. I waited for my moment. Karen nodded at me, giving me the floor, and I stood up slowly, laying my folder on the table. My voice shook slightly at first, but I pushed through it. "For months," I began, "I've watched Robert manipulate, bully, and exploit the people who work here. He hides behind his position, but the truth is, he's been breaking rules, abusing power, and hurting people, especially my son." "At that," Robert scoffed, "this is absurd," he snapped. "Your son's a grown man. If he has issues, that's his problem, not mine." I didn't even look at him. I kept going, my voice gaining strength with each word. "I have documented instances of him withholding pay, falsifying reports, and threatening employees who spoke up. I have emails, voice recordings, and witness statements. And I'm not just talking about my son, I'm talking about others who were too afraid to come forward." I opened the folder and began passing out copies of the evidence. The room grew colder, the air thicker, as page after page landed in front of the managers. Screenshots of messages where Robert demanded unpaid overtime. Audio clips where his voice dripped with threats. Financial documents that didn't add up. Every piece painted a picture of corruption that could no longer be ignored. Robert's smirk faltered. He sat up straighter, his jaw tightening, his eyes darting to the papers like he wanted to tear them apart with his bare hands. This is fabricated," he stammered. "He's twisting things to make me look bad." But Karen didn't look convinced. The managers leaned in, reading carefully, their brows furrowing deeper with every passing second. One of them, a stern man named Michael, finally looked up and said, "Robert, this is serious, very serious." I turned to my son and gave him a small nod. It was his turn. He stood, his voice strong, steadier than mine had ever been in that room. "For years, I thought I had to endure this," he said, looking directly at Robert. "I thought I had to keep quiet, to keep my head down, because speaking up would ruin me. But the truth is, it was you who ruined people. You ruined good workers, good families, all for your own ego, and now everyone knows it." Robert slammed his fist on the table, his face red with rage. "This is a setup. You're both just bitter, pathetic." "Enough," Karen interrupted sharply. Her voice cut through the tension like a blade. "I've seen enough." She gathered the papers into a neat stack, her expression unreadable but firm. "Robert, you are suspended effective immediately pending a full investigation. You will leave the building today." For the first time in all the years I'd known him, Robert was speechless. His mouth opened and closed like he was trying to find words, but none came out. The smug confidence, the untouchable arrogance, it all crumbled in an instant. Security was called, and as he was escorted out, he glared at me with a look that could have burned holes in my skin. But I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. For once, he was the one with no power. The silence in the room after he left was deafening. Then, slowly, people began to breathe again, like they'd been holding it all along. Karen turned to me and my son. "Thank you," she said simply. "This couldn't have been easy, but it was necessary." Walking out of that building with my son by my side felt like stepping into sunlight after years of darkness. People we barely knew nodded at us. Some even whispered "thank you" under their breath as we passed. For the first time in a long time, I felt proud. Not just of myself, but of my son. Proud that we had faced this together, that we had refused to stay silent. That night, we sat at the kitchen table, just the two of us, eating takeout and laughing for the first time in weeks. There was relief in the air, but also something deeper, a sense of justice, of closure. My son looked at me and said, "Dad, I didn't think you'd ever stand up to him, but you did. You really did." And I realized then that this whole ordeal hadn't just been about exposing Robert. It had been about proving to my son, and maybe even to myself, that courage doesn't come from never being afraid. It comes from standing up, even when you are. I don't know what will happen next for Robert. Maybe he'll face charges. Maybe he'll disappear into obscurity. Maybe he'll try to claw his way back. But for me and my son, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we're free. What matters is that we fought back and won. So if you're listening to this and you've ever felt trapped, silenced, or powerless, I want you to know you are stronger than you think. Sometimes all it takes is one moment, one decision, one stand to change everything. If this story struck a chord with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Final Twist brings you the stories that prove heartbreak can break you or build your comeback. And remember, revenge is sweetest when it's deserved.